will be even a better player, and he was a good one for KC. He'll be an even better player for the Rams. So the Rams said, hey, man, we are in a Super Bowl window. We are going to go for it. And Trent McDuffie is a lot better than the 29th pick because the Rams have 2 first-round picks. They just gave up one. Here's another team that should do that. The Chicago Bears. They are now this morning the odds-on favorite to sign Raiders edge rusher Max Crosby.
All right, we have 2 completely different segments happening right now, so let's focus on the actual breaking news that deserves our attention. The Los Angeles Rams trading for Trent McDuffie. We can circle back to the Chicago Bears conversation in another video, but right now, this is the story that matters. Look, this move is obviously fantastic for the Rams. This is precisely what I have been talking about throughout the offseason when discussing their roster construction. Offensively, there is genuinely nothing else they need. And let me be clear about my stance on this team. I have repeated this take consistently for the past 2 years, because it is simply how I feel about this organization. As long as Matthew Stafford is healthy and on the field, given how this roster is currently structured, the Rams are an elite team. They are a top-tier franchise. They are legitimate Super Bowl contenders. Full stop. Obviously, we have to account for other injuries across the roster. That is the nature of football. But the foundational principle remains. With Stafford under center and the core pieces generally intact, this team belongs in the conversation with the best in the league. They are a genuine threat to win it all. And when you reach that level, the difference between winning a championship and falling short often comes down to factors that have nothing to do with talent or capability. We love to dissect playoff losses and assign blame to specific elements. The defense failed, a receiver dropped a critical pass, the play calling was questionable. We zoom in on singular events and construct narratives around them. But sometimes the reality is much simpler. You just lost the football game on that particular Saturday or Sunday. It does not mean you were incapable of winning the Super Bowl. It does not mean you were inherently worse than the team that beat you. It just means that on that day, the ball did not bounce your way. That is football. I would love to see the actual statistical analysis of how frequently the better team actually wins in playoff matchups. And I am not talking about games against inferior opponents. I mean when 2 legitimate contenders face each other. What is the true mathematical probability? My suspicion is that it is significantly narrower than most fans and analysts want to acknowledge. The margin between winning and losing at that level is razor thin. This is why I evaluate moves like this through a specific lens. They provide your team with a greater margin of error. Tom Brady has talked about this concept extensively. I have shown the clip countless times about how a great offensive coordinator gives his quarterback a wider margin of error in terms of play execution, decision-making, and overall performance. I apply the same logic to roster construction at the team level. When you make aggressive acquisitions like this, you are not just adding talent. You are giving your entire organization a bigger cushion for when things do not go perfectly. And that is what this move ultimately does for the Rams. It obviously makes them a better team on paper, but more importantly, it expands their margin of error. It means that when a key player has an off night, when a call does not go their way, when the football gods are not smiling upon them, they still have the talent and depth to overcome those obstacles. Now, looking at this from the Kansas City Chiefs' perspective, it is equally fascinating. They are parting with an important defensive piece, but in return, they acquire the 29th overall pick. That gives them 2 first-round selections in the upcoming draft. They essentially flipped McDuffie for that pick in a transaction with the Rams. It is an interesting strategic decision. I do not want to characterize it as simply kicking the can down the road for the Chiefs, but it is also not exactly a back-to-basics reset for them either. Beyond the first-round compensation, there are additional picks involved. I believe a 3rd next year, along with some day 3 selections in the 5th and 6th or 5th and 7th rounds. Once you get into that territory, it becomes much more of a crapshoot. We all remember the late-round gems, the Tom Bradys and the Richard Shermans, the players who defy the odds and build legitimate careers. But the reality is that approximately 90% of those late-round picks amount to nothing in the NFL. It is difficult to place too much value on those selections. A 3rd-round pick, however, retains legitimate value. And it is not as if the Kansas City Chiefs have demonstrated any inability to draft effectively. They have a strong track record of identifying talent and developing players, so it is entirely plausible that this trade could work out well for them in the long term. But for the Rams, this is an unequivocal win-now move. There is no ambiguity about their intentions. This is exactly the type of aggressive swing I have been advocating for other franchises to take. When people ask what it means to be all in, what it means to take a big swing, this is the answer. It looks exactly like this. It means acknowledging that your best opportunity to win a Super Bowl is essentially this season, and perhaps next, but especially right now. It means recognizing that window and committing fully to it. This is what every Super Bowl winner has ultimately done. Whether it was the Rams themselves a few years ago, whether it was the Eagles, whether it was the 49ers, even though they did not win the championship, they reached multiple Super Bowls by making these types of moves. This is what it takes. The teams that do not make that extra move, the Cowboys, the Bills, the Ravens, they consistently come up short. There is always that additional step, that extra acquisition, that widens your margin of error. Going back to my earlier point about playoff probabilities, let's use hypothetical numbers. If the better team wins in the playoffs approximately 59 or 60% of the time, a move like this might increase that probability by 3 or 4%. That is still massive. That is still a significant boost. You are putting yourself in a position where, if you are already the better team, you are statistically more likely to actually prove it on the field. We have seen this formula work repeatedly. The Seahawks acquiring Rashid Shaheed at the trade deadline was massive. I remember saying at the time that we could look back on that move and identify it as the difference maker. The Rams are actually my gold standard reference point for this entire philosophy because of what they did during their Super Bowl run. Obviously, trading for Matthew Stafford was the foundational move. That was enormous. But then they went out and added Odell Beckham Jr. and Von Miller during the season. Those were not pieces they originally had. And without those two acquisitions, they do not win that Super Bowl. It is that simple. The Eagles signing Saquon Barkley fits the same pattern. That was the next move, the next step that elevated them from contender to champion. Sometimes these moves happen in the offseason, sometimes they happen mid-season. The timing varies, but this McDuffie trade, to me, is exactly that kind of move. Consider this. If the Rams had been able to acquire McDuffie last season, if he had been on the roster for that crazy overtime game against the Seahawks, does that change the outcome? Probably, right? How could it not? I am not saying they would have definitely won, but it is hard to imagine it not making a difference. Would they have beaten the Panthers during the regular season in one of those close losses? The butterfly effect ripples through the entire season. Maybe they secure the #1 seed. Maybe their entire playoff path looks different. I genuinely do not understand why Colin only spent 2 seconds on this story. Maybe he will circle back to it later in the show. But to me, this is enormous. This is breaking news. This is the conversation we should be having. Perhaps he is waiting for the West Coast audience to wake up, since he typically operates on East Coast time. I do not know, but I want to hear from you. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I read every single comment, whether you agree with me or think I am completely wrong. Either way, let's generate some discussion. Let's get into some debates. But ultimately, let's just have some fun with it. Please do consider subscribing to the channel. We are building an amazing community here, and I genuinely love seeing you be part of it. My goal is to create something we all feel connected to, something we are truly excited to be part of. I believe we are well on our way to making that happen. Do not forget to give this video a thumbs up. It genuinely helps with visibility and keeps the algorithm happy. Thank you so much for watching.